Thanks for taking some time out of your schedule to check out this episode of Vintage Audio Review, where I talk about this Carver M-500t power amplifier. In 1985, Carver sold this for $559, or in today's money, about $1,500. It was rated at 200 watts per channel into 8 ohms from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz at 0.05% THD or better. The T designation in the model number indicated that it had a tube transfer function, sonic characteristic. This amplifier is on loan from my good buddy Ian, and I'm going to give you a quick tour of the front of it, the back of it, and then we'll pop the cover and see what it looks like on the inside, and then there'll be some data and discussion of the results and what it sounded like. So sit back and enjoy. This obviously is the front of the M500t. On the left you have your on-off switch, and I do have the unit plugged in so you could see the incandescent lamps lit up a bit for the power meters. Now the power meters were off by a fair amount when I first tested the unit. It was reading only 30 watts when there was 50 watts going in, and 60 watts when there was 100 watts going in, and the calibration is to set it for 100 watts at 1 kilohertz into the 8 ohm load, which I did. So now the meters are indeed calibrated. So here we have the rear of the 500T. Obviously here are our two inputs, the unbalanced RCA inputs. We do have a ground lug terminal. Here are instructions for hooking up mono, and that is how I hooked it up. It's pretty much a no-brainer. Here are our speaker terminals. Now it refers to inverting and non-inverting, which would be this is the non-inverting terminal and the inverting terminal as per the little diagram here. So I should point out that these speaker terminals are not banana jack friendly. It fooled me for a little bit. I was trying to get my speaker banana jack in there, and I thought it was in, but it wasn't really in, so it threw me off for a few minutes when I wasn't getting any power out of the amp when I first powered it on. Here shows this here diagram is your stereo connection, showing your speaker pairs to use, and we do have a light right here for dim or bright. I find that both positions the lights still dim even when it's on the bright position. The switch works, it's just a dim, just the bulbs in my opinion are too dim for the power meters. And here is our 10 amp slow blow fuse, which you can just unscrew and replace, which I did have to do. So here is the inside of the M500T with the cover removed obviously, and I just wanted to show what it looked like a little bit. I did have to adjust the meter, and those controls are right here. Those two little pots can be adjusted to bring the meter back into calibration. So that's kind of just the inside of it. You obviously have heat sinks over here and over here for your two output channels, and then you have your there's some transistors here which are for the switching power supply for the magnetic field portion of the amplifier. And that's kind of it in all its glory. Here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz for the amplifier, putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms, and we can see that our THD is better than 0.07%. The SNRs are better than 94 dB. Now the THD plus noise is better than 63 dB. It's not spectacular, but that is what it is. And the gain is 26 dB. We often see gains closer to 29 dB for amplifiers, but this really wasn't spec. So here we have the frequency response with the amplifier putting out 20 watts into 8 ohms. And the specification was that it needed to be within plus or minus 1/2 dB from the 1 kilohertz measurement. And here we are seeing that at 20 kilohertz, which is the worst case condition, we are down about 0.5 dB for the right channel, which is in red, or about 0.7 dB for the left channel in yellow. So we're pretty close to meeting the requirement. Here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz for the amplifier, putting out greater than 214 watts per channel into 8 ohms. And we can see that our THD is less than the 0.05% requirement, and the SNR is above 91 dB. Now, the specification called out an SNR of at least 100 dB, so we're a little short there, but not too bad. And then the THD plus noise is in the greater than 74 dB range. So here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with the amplifier putting out 255 watts into 8 ohms for the right channel and a little bit more into the left channel. And the THD is starting to get bad. The left channel is worse at 0.6%, which in reality is not that bad. However, the SNR has dropped to about 46 dB for the left channel. This is about the max power that you could get out of this particular amplifier, I would say. And here is the result of the multi-tone testing with the amplifier running into an 8 ohm load, and it's showing about 13 to 14 bits of distortion-free range, which is actually pretty good for a lot of the older amplifiers that I have tested. Here's a plot showing the output impedance of the M500t, and the worst case impedance would be about 0.26 ohms, which translates into a dampening factor of a little bit more than 30. You take the impedance of 8 ohms and divide it by 0.26 and you get a bit over 30. And the specification for the Carver was more than 30, so we are meeting that requirement. Here we have a plot of the noise of the M500t. In this situation, both inputs are shorted. The amplifier is terminated into 8 ohm loads, and we're looking at the spectrum of the noise. Now, there is a specification for A weighting, which was not more than 300 millivolts, so we're about half that level of noise. It does look kind of ugly, but it's down at worst case about 90 dB. I would say that this is meeting the specification. This plot shows the crosstalk between the left and right channels of the M500t, and this measurement was done by shorting the input to the right channel and having the left channel driven so that it was putting out 20 watts into 8 ohms. Now, the specification for this is at 1 kilohertz you should have more than 80 dB separation, which we almost have. We have maybe 75 dB of separation depending on where you read the graph, and then at 20 kilohertz you should have better than 60 dB separation. So we definitely meet the 20 kilohertz requirement for separation, and I'm going to say that we're meeting the separation at 1 kilohertz as well. It's very close to 80 dB. This plot shows the THD versus frequency for a couple of different power output levels into 8 ohms. For the most part, the amplifier is meeting the specification requirement of less than 0.05% THD across the entire bands, except maybe at the band edges. It's as high as 0.1% at 20 hertz, which is still pretty darn good. And then at about 15 kilohertz or so, for the 150 watt power levels, it looks like the distortion really increases. I'm not sure if that's just a measurement anomaly or there was something really going on with the amp there, but for the most part, it met its requirement. The plot on the left is the THD SNR at 1 kilohertz for the amplifier putting out about 200 watts into 4 ohm loads versus the one on the right, which is the amplifier putting out about 100 watts into 8 ohm loads. The difference in SNR is apparent. The 8 ohm load case, the SNR is about 6 dB better, and the THD is slightly better, as is the THD plus noise. Both gains are pretty much the same, and this just kind of shows the amplifier works a little bit better with 8 ohm loads. Here is the mono block performance looking into an 8 ohm load putting out 20 watts,
Its frequency response is only down a half a dB at 20 kilohertz, so it is looking pretty good. The data on the left is the THD SNR plot for the amplifier running as a monoblock into an 8 ohm load, and it's putting out 208 watts per channel. Compare that to the plot on the right, which is for the amplifier running as a stereo amp, putting out a bit over 200 watts per channel, also into 8 ohms. And what we can tell is the gain for the monoblock configuration is about 6 dB more than it is when it's running as a stereo amplifier. The THD is pretty much the same. The SNR is a bit better for the monoblock configuration, and the THD plus noise is slightly worse for the monoblock configuration. The plot on the left is the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz for the amplifier running as a monoblock amp, once again into 4 ohms, whereas on the right it's running into 4 ohms at 100 watts, but it's running as a stereo amplifier. In this case, there really is not a lot of difference between the two types of configurations, other than as a monoblock you're getting another 6 dB of gain. I just wanted to demonstrate the transformer hum that the M500t gives off during testing at higher power levels.
As you saw from the data, the M500t met nearly all of its 39-year-old specifications, and that was into 8 ohms. What's interesting is the service manual just shows 8 ohm specifications, while the owner's manual does have a 350 watt into 4 ohm specification at 1 kilohertz, both channels driven. When I tried to recreate that data point at about 265 watts or so, I blew the 10 amps low blow fuse. Sorry, Ian. But it survived that quite nicely, and as far as listening to the unit, I thought it sounded really good, and my speakers that I used were the KEF 107s, which are basically a 4 ohm speaker, and this was hitting peaks of about 200 watts into 4 ohms, no problem whatsoever. It never sounded stressed, and it gave me all the bass and treble that I would expect from a power amp. It didn't get really warm. The top of the case, which would be around here, was the hottest part, and that measured about 117F, which is on the cooler end of the spectrum of amps that I have measured. So I would say this is a cool running amplifier. Also, when I terminated the inputs to the amplifier and just listened for noise out of the speakers, I heard absolutely nothing. So it's very quiet. It also did not have any turn on thumps or turn off thumps as well. So overall, I thought it was a very good amp. On my speakers, it drove it as loud as I would normally ever want to drive my KEF 107. The meters are a bit hard to see. They can be seen okay, but I didn't think they were illuminated great. The lights, even if you go to the bright position on the switch in the back, it's still dim. Possibly if these were replaced with some brighter lamps or LEDs, they might look better. But you know, that is what it is. Also, what look to be banana jack friendly speaker terminals are not. They are pushing the wire kind of terminal, or a spade lug, small spade lug. And that would be my only nitpicks about the amplifier. So there you have it. I will have some other Carver gear that is not a power amplifier at some point to look at. We'll see how that goes. So there you have it. That's my review of the Carver M-500t power amplifier. Once again, if you have any comments, I would like to have you share them, I think. And I thank you for watching. If you have not subscribed, please do so, and have a great day or night.